As you just saw in that YouTube video clip by TababaRep1 in December of 2022, in the hobby of RC aircraft, things can go wrong very quickly, and one of the main culprits behind these split-second disasters can be faulty electrical circuitry. Now, one of the key factors in ensuring reliability in these systems is making quality electrical connections, and this is where soldering comes in. And soldering is basically using solder, which is a special metal alloy, this silver wire here, and a soldering iron, which has a very hot tip that can melt the solder to join wires, connectors, and other electrical components together. It's kind of like gluing things together with Elmer's, though this analogy is a bit inaccurate, as you'll learn in a moment. Now, I've been soldering for a few years now, both on personal projects and on robotics teams, and one of my past projects was this RC plane here, where I use soldering for the electric motors. And this is a current project I'm working on here in the center. It involves a lot of soldering of different types, like splicing wires together and connecting wires to variable connectors like this EC5 connector here and these bulk connectors here. Now, this can all seem overwhelming at first, but what you'll learn today is that soldering comes down to three fundamentals. And I said fundamentals over basics because these are ideologies, ways of thinking about soldering. The first one is tinning, which is basically preparing your wire by putting solder on your wire before you make the connection. The second one is heat transfer, which is how soldering works. It's if you have two surfaces, if you get heat transferred between them, that allows the solder to melt and flow freely between them, and that is our ideal final result because if it flows freely between them, you can get a consistent structure for your solder, and when that solidifies, you get a good electrical connection. And I'll also be showing you how to set up your environment and also use shrink wrap to make your connection safer. And I'll be teaching you how to solder together two wires today as our application for this. Now, what you'll need to get started is a soldering iron like the one shown here. Any type will do. A heat gun is optional if you want to do stuff with shrink wrap. You'll need the solder itself. Alligator clips are very handy to have. You can have the wires that you want soldered and any shrink wrap that you'll need. Now, the first step you'll do is turn on your soldering iron to about 350 degrees Celsius and make sure your soldering wire and alligator clips are easily accessible. The second step is to strip both of your wires to the desired length. I usually do about a ½ inch, and then twist the ends to make sure the wires are all together. The third step is to tin your wires. Put your wire into an alligator clip and hold the solder in one hand and the iron in the other. Melt a little solder on the tip of the iron, then press and hold the tip on the wire while feeding solder onto the point where they're touching. You should see the solder flow around the surface of the wire, like so. And this is what it should look like after you're finished. Now, according to Mike Jude and Keith Brindley in their 1999 book, Soldering and Electronics Assembly, tinning is used to improve the solderability of the materials and thus the quality of the connection. So this is a very important step. Now, the fourth step, if you're using heat shrink, is to put it around one of the wires before you connect them. The fifth step is to actually connect your wires, which should be much easier if you properly tin them. Again, melt a little solder on the tip of the iron, then just hold the tip against both wires until the solder on them melts into a single blob, like you're seeing now. Then just take the iron away and the connection is made. The sixth and final step is to make your connection safe with shrink wrap. So just slide the shrink wrap over the connection, get your heat gun, turn it on, and just hold the tip of the heat gun close so that the shrink wrap can tighten around your connection. And then you're done, and your connection is solid. Well done. Now I'm going to go over some do nots. One, do not try to paint the solder on like this. Remember, solder works by heat transfer, so you need to hold the tip of the soldering iron against the wire for the solder to flow. Another one is do not apply too much solder onto the wire. One, you'll be wasting solder, and two, if you have a connection that you want to make, the wire might not fit in it if there's too much solder on it. A third one is that when you use solder, it makes some smoke that can be toxic, so don't breathe that in, and it is highly recommended to wear a face mask. The last one is just to make sure you turn your solder off after you're done and clean the tip with the little metal coils that usually come with the soldering iron. In review, we learned how to safely solder two wires together by applying the fundamentals of soldering: preparation by tinning, the idea of heat transfer, and the result of solder flow. If nothing else, remember these three things. 1. Always tin your wires. It makes connections much easier to make. 2. Do not paint on the solder. Hold the tip in place and feed the solder on to the connection instead. And 3. Remember your ABCs so you don't forget the heat shrink. Apply before connecting. Finally, as the website My EMS Solutions put it in their 2016 article, The Importance of Soldering in the Electronics Industry, soldering is an essential tool in building anything from a child's toy to an aircraft. The skills you just learned are valuable not just for RC planes, but for the vast array of electronics out there. Go make some cool stuff.